Hey everybody, I'm Dylan Johnson.
And I am Sam Newman.
And for our Leadership University, we're going to be talking to you about Budgeting 101, creating a personal budget. Just gotta restart. What the fuck? Okay. Never mind. Restart.
Click the space button. Try it. That's what you should click.
Oh, it just wasn't clicked onto the screen.
All right. No more resets. This is the last one.
All right.
No mistakes. If you make one, it's all over. We're out of leadership mentors.
Hit start. Hey everybody, I'm Dylan Johnson.
And I am Sam Newman.
And today, for our Leadership University, we're going to be talking to you about Budgeting 101, creating a personal budget.
Before we get into budgeting, let's talk about who we are. As for me,
No mistakes.
That wasn't a mistake. That was a blooper. That's a different thing.
Not going in the video and cutting that out.
All right, you ready to start over?
Yes.
That was just a blooper. I only make bloopers. You only make mistakes. That's how this works.
Hey everybody, I'm Dylan Johnson.
And I am Sam Newman.
And today, for our Leadership University, we're going to be talking to you about Budgeting 101, creating a personal budget.
But before we get into budgeting, let's talk to you a little bit about who we are. So as for me, I was an intern at Central Bank. When I did this internship, I got to work with the financial planning department, look through all kinds of different financial documents, whether it was invoices, spreadsheets, anything you could think of, I worked with it. When I was going through a lot of the invoices one day, I found that there was doubling of toner ink purchases. So I decided to make that my project. Over the next couple of weeks, I would look through all the invoices, find all the doubling of toner inks, and ended up saving the company about $250,000. I also serve as the VP of Finance for our fraternity, Sigma Phi Epsilon. There I work to create financial security for everything. That includes budgeting, purchases, security with the financial constraints, and making sure that everything runs smoothly.
And I budget. But on a more serious note, ever since I moved out of my own apartment, I realized just how important a monthly budget is. Whether you're tracking your income, expenses, rent, utilities, entertainment, or all the above, it's really important to keep track of your money, especially when you need it for such important purchases like that.
What is a budget? Well, the definition of a budget is a written record of the money that flows in and out of your household every month.
Or pocket.
But why should you budget?
So budgeting is the first step on the road to financial success. Everyone needs to watch their money. Everybody needs to know where their money's coming from that month. And controlling your day-to-day finances allows you to do the things you want on top of paying the bills that you need to pay. So budgeting is vital for anyone, or really just anyone who needs to pay any kind of bills or do anything.
Not to mention that when you budget, it's actually applicable to your future careers and work experience, because while you're doing personal finance for yourself, that never stops. Maybe you work in a job in the healthcare industry. Maybe you work in the job in the finance industry. Regardless, you're going to have to know how to work with money. So let's talk about balancing your income and your expenses.
So you're going to want to start budgeting now. A lot of people say, oh, I can push it off till next month, maybe next year, maybe when I'm out of college. But budgeting now saves you a lot of money in the long run, and you'll feel a lot more stable and secure if you know where all your money's going. Don't wait till you're like financially on your feet to begin it. Just sit down right now and figure out your budget.
Absolutely. And when people talk about budgeting and they talk about, their income and their expenses, they get a little bit annoyed, or they get bored by it, because they say, well, that's a lot of work, or, that's, I know how much I spend, and, like this. Well, actually, when you look through all of your expenses and you keep a record of all that, you actually find that you'll spend more than you were thinking you were going to spend. So when you balance the amount you're actually bringing in, whether that's from a job, scholarships, whatever it might be, and the actual amount of expenses that you have, you can find out how much money you're netting, and you can use that through a budgeting system.
And when it comes down to it, a budget sounds like a lot of fancy words like income, expenses, netting, all those kind of things. But really, a budgeting, it's nothing more than balancing your income versus your expenses, what you get each month versus what you're spending each month. And it gets really simple once you get into it.
How should you start? Well, if you haven't budgeted before, or you feel like this is a point where you don't have any kind of experience, you don't know if it's a good idea to really give it a try, you don't think you're making enough money, or you're not far enough in life where you feel like a budget is really necessary, I suggest that for the next month, you write down everything you spend money on and anything that you receive money from. Once you calculate all that information, you're really going to get an idea of how much money is coming in and out of your personal finances.
For me, when I started budgeting this year, this step was incredibly helpful to me. Throughout my whole life so far, I've just kind of been like, oh, I'll spend 10 bucks here on dinner, but I won't spend 10 bucks tomorrow. It'll balance out. But once I started looking at what I was spending and my receipts and stuff, I realized just how much I was spending and how much I could be saving if I had just been keeping track of that the whole time.
Here's an example of a monthly tracking example. As you can see in the graph, you have your balance, which is the money you're going to start out with, and then you have some of your expenses. Maybe that's rent, paychecks, of course your taxes, maybe some of the money you use to eat out, your phone bill, your music CDs, car repairs, groceries, clothes. The list can go on forever and ever. Any kind of thing that you spend money on is considered an expense.
Let's talk about creating a personal budget. So the first step, as we said before, is track your expenses. So this can be done in a variety of ways. It can start with keeping all the receipts from the stores you're visiting that month. I always like to just refer to my bank account app. They give you plenty of handy account statements for all the expenses you made that month. And you just really want an itemized list of what you've been spending your money on that month, because that's really the first big step to knowing where you can start saving your money.
And then once you have that number of the amount of money that you know that you're spending, you have to figure out, what do you have to spend? Because there's a difference between non-essential and essential expenses. Something like rent or groceries is considered an essential expense because you need food to live, or you need a place to live. But something like fast food, which is, while something you need to eat, it's not necessarily an essential. It's a more expensive luxury item, which is considered non-essentials in your budget.
Absolutely, Sam. And stuff saying like that, it really comes down to self-control. You're the one in charge of your money, you're the one making it, you're the one spending it. And it's just really important to have that self-control, which we're definitely going to touch upon.
There are two types of expenses, as we talked about a little bit earlier. You have your essential expenses and you have your non-essential expenses. As far as the essentials, that's have to have in order to live, as we discussed earlier. Again, those can be things like rent, groceries, things that you absolutely have to have.
And then non-essential expenses. You have going out to McDonald's, buying the next video game, maybe subscriptions to streaming services you don't want anymore. Non-essential expenses can also be things that you can control. For example, your phone bill, maybe when you're going out, don't use your data all that time, so you don't have to pay a little more. Maybe your water bill. Do you really need to take 2 or 3 showers a day? You can cut that down, and you can take those those essential expenses, which you think, and cut out the non-essential parts, so you're saving more money there as you go.
Essentials are fixed expenses. And again, we talked about those a little bit, but you have your mortgages, your rent, your insurance, your auto home, your car payments, your taxes, and your school loans if you have those. Taxes is probably one of the most common fixed expense that just about everybody has, because we all have to pay taxes. So that's a really good example when you're talking about what is considered an essential fixed expense. It's something that is required, it is something that you have to pay for, and it is something that's going to be deducted from the amount of money that you're bringing in.
Mm-hmm. And to touch a little more on taxes, it's always important to look ahead at when your taxes are going to be taken out. For example, you're starting a new job and you aren't really thinking about taxes. You're just oh, I'm making $14, $15 an hour. I'm going to work this much. Always set aside a big chunk to take away your taxes. It's usually 0.15 or 0.20%.
Most college students is going to be around 15% for your taxes.
So when you're always calculating how much you're going to make a month, or you're not sure based on just how much you're working, always just make sure to factor out 15 to 20% for your taxes, so you know that you're not going to have that money and you're aware when you're going into planning your next month.
Then we have something called essential variable expenses, and that's something like car maintenance, gas, food, electricity, heat, and your phone. And we talked about this a little bit earlier with the phone, but these are expenses where you can change or alter or adjust the amount you have to spend. While it is necessary, it's not quite status quo, set in stone. For example, gas. Gas fluctuates, and you could go to places like Kroger or Meijer that have gas stations and use fuel reward points to help lower the cost of the gas with that. Same thing with food. Again, coupons or specialty deals with grocery stores.
Another big part of budgeting in concern to variable expenses is you're never quite sure how much you're going to have, like you're going to need that month for that. So it's always a good practice to kind of shoot high when you're planning your budget on those. Give yourself maybe an extra 10, 20 bucks for wiggle room on your electricity bill, for example, just so you know you have it there, you have it safe. Now, if you have that extra money, it doesn't mean, oh, I have 20 extra bucks in my budget this month that I put aside for safety. I should go out and spend that on something because it's the end of the month. No, it's a great thing to stack your budgets to the next month, which means you're rolling over money so you keep building up. And then later on, you don't have to put as much money into those kind of categories.
Exactly. And the official term for this method is called the drip method. It is when you are reinvesting the extra money that you made off of your budget by not utilizing it into the next one to give you more security and peace of mind. So then let's talk about the non-essential expenses. These are the things that you absolutely do not have to be able to survive. That is your clothing, your books, your movies, your video games, and other items that you really want, but you don't need.
This is where it comes down to the biggest part of budgeting, which we touched upon a little earlier, which is self-control. Once again, it's your money, it's your life, it's your expenses, you're an adult. Nobody's hoarding over you telling you, oh, you can't spend money on that. Like, wait till Christmas for that. No, it's your money, and so therefore you're the responsible one. And self-responsibility can be really hard, especially when you're first setting out budgeting. But it helps a lot when you have those fixed numbers down there and you know, this is how much I have to spend. This is my money in real numbers, real terms, and I know I'm spending these dollars that are mine. And that puts it in a little bit of perspective when you see something at the store you might really want. And you just deciding if you're wanting to buy it, take a look at your budgeting sheet and just realize, wait, I don't really need this month. I can live without it. It's not essential. I can save money here.
And to touch on that just a little bit extra, when most people get to this part of the presentation, this part of the idea of budgeting, they think, my gosh, well, I guess I've got to cut out all of these non-essential expenses. That is not the case. The non-essential expenses are actually really important because they are the control factor in the quality of your life. They decide how interesting your life's going to be. Things that you want but you don't necessarily need is what makes life interesting. It's the video games, the movies, the books, whatever you like for your personal interests. So what you need to do is utilize the budget to be able to include these non-essential expenses so that you can keep a nice control on the quality of life that you want to live in a sustainable manner.
For me personally, as an example, I'm not touching that a little more. In my personal budget, I have an entertainment category that I put a certain amount of money in each month, for example. And in that entertainment category, I might go out to a restaurant. I might buy something I've been looking at for a while. But really, when it comes down to it, you're looking at how much you have left in that category and thinking, wow, maybe I could save this till next month. Use the drip method, as Sam mentioned, and stack it up a little bit, you know? Have that extra money, have that wiggle room.
Absolutely. So let's talk about some more possible expenses. Now, we touched on a couple of them very briefly, but again, some of those expenses could be your housing. It could be gas, electricity, insurance, food, entertainment, your phone, toiletries, credit cards, gym memberships. It could literally be anything. This world is built on bringing money in and then spending it for something else. So let's talk about balancing income and expenses.
All right. So at the end of the month, you're going to want to break everything down into categories. So you're going to look at, is your income greater than your expenses? Are you bringing in enough money to pay for everything you're paying for? If so, yes, that's great. Then that extra money you have over, you can start to save. Now, if you don't, and you're spending more than you're bringing in, then you have a problem because now you're going into debt. And never go into debt because debt is bad.
Well, and you know, debt is bad in a budgeting sense when you were talking about your money. But however, debt is not something that you should be completely scared of. You know, the classic college student afraid of the credit card, it's only as dangerous and not necessarily good for your financial health if you can't use it responsibly. Debt is actually a very powerful thing. If you own a credit card and you manage out and you budget how much you're going to spend and you know that you can pay that off immediately on your debit card, then you're actually going to be building credit, which will give you higher purchasing power in the future so that you can have those higher quality essential expenses or non-essential expenses for whatever your budget might include later in life.
Absolutely, Sam. Thank you for bringing that up. And then so at this stage in your budgeting process, you're creating your budgeting sheet and you're breaking things down into categories. You've looked at all your expenses for this first month that you've been making your budget. That's when you really get to start to get into making the categories that you realize you're going to spend on. So you might want to set aside however much for rent. You're going to set aside however much for, oh, I want to go out to eat 4 or 5 times this month. This is probably how much I'm going to need. That's what you want to set aside that stuff for. And you can base that off the expenses that you've been tracking for this first month of your budgeting process.
And if you don't have an idea of what that might be, or you haven't done the research yet, a general rule of thumb for it is 50% goes to your housing, food, and essential costs. 30% can go to entertainment. It can go to things that make life more interesting. And then set aside 20% for savings in the buffer in case something happens, like a pandemic. So let's talk about your expenses being greater than your income.
What can you cut out? Once again, this comes down to self-control. Do you really need to eat out that much? Do you really need to go to the store and pick up the 10 extra items off what you were wanting? Self-control is incredibly important, as Sam was talking about with a credit card too. It's really all about how you control your own life because you're the one who's responsible for it. So when you're looking for cutting out, after you've collected all your data from that first month and you're starting to look over it and stuff, you can look at like, oh, okay, well, I ate out like 8 times this month, but I really could have saved some money and just stayed at home. You know, do I need to eat out that much that month? No. So, okay, I'll put less money in my budget so I'm not tempted to go over that and go out and eat way more than I need to. And that'll save you money in the long run. You'll start to build up your savings, and overall, you'll just appreciate it better because you'll feel better that you're saving that money.
And to add on to that a little bit, so one of the things that people usually look for to cut out expenses to help increase their income and make it more than their expenses is the unnecessary purchases. However, you can also do this with the necessary expenses that you have. A good example of this is actually at NKU. Let's say that you're like 2 college students that are living in apartments, and one of your biggest expenses is buying groceries so that you have food to eat. Well, NKU happens to have a great service called Fuel NKU, which is essentially a student grocery store that you can go in and get all kinds of different foods that they stock. That is a great example of utilizing resources to help lower your expenses and eventually make your income greater than it. So let's talk a little bit about how you actually save when we talked about that 20% out of the 100 rule. So first off, you want to pay yourself first. When you get that paycheck and you have all this money, a lot of times people get really excited. Maybe you worked 40 hours that week and you're like, oh my gosh, I've got this $400 or $500 check and I got all this money. Let's go spend something. You should actually pay yourself first. And when I mean pay yourself first, I mean put that money in a savings account. Put it away where you're not going to touch it and you can use it as that buffer.
So also, these are just some examples on here, but taking advantage of like your employer's retirement plan. Obviously, we're not all super thinking about retirement yet, but it's always good to start saving for it. And budgeting is the first step of that. Things like using automatic transfers. As an example, when you're using Venmo, it takes a fee from your cost if you choose to transfer it to your bank account immediately. Or you can wait the 1 to 3 days and save all that money. Obviously, if you need your money right then and there, you might need to do that quick transfer. But if you just want to move that money to your bank account, it's been sitting there a while, and you're not in any rush, then don't waste your time doing that fast transfer. Don't waste your money doing that fast transfer. That's an easy save. You're saving some couple bucks, and they start to add up. And that's just one example of plenty of ways that you can save money in like simple ways like that by using like automatic transfers, things like that.
Absolutely. And, you know, again, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but taking advantage of those deals and discounts that you get on all those different services, kind of building off of what your employer might do. Say you have a subscription to Spotify Music and you utilize music all throughout your day using different things. And maybe you wanted to also watch TV, but, you know, $5.99 for Hulu and then $5.99 for Spotify, or $4.99 for Spotify is close to $10 every month. It's going to be an extra expense on you. But they actually offer a bundle deal where they put those both together for students for $4.99. Taking advantage of deals like that and cutting costs and understanding that those things can sometimes be consolidated for your benefit is how you'll have more money to put away for saving.
And to build off that, just one more thing. When you first start, people start out budgeting. They look at kind of those maybe small expenses and they think, oh, that's not a big deal. That's like an extra $3 a month. That's nothing. Well, you want to look at the long run for that. $3 a month over a year is $36. That's $36 that could go to something else, your savings fund, something like that. And that's just one example. All those small costs start to really add up, and you start saving on them, and you'll really start to notice the difference quickly.
Don't forget, a quick and easy way to save a little money is to toss your spare change into a jar of piggy bank. Now, I know we're in a coin shortage right now, or maybe we're only using cards, but there's actually a lot of scenarios where you don't think you have that many coins, but you do. More often than not, you won't remember it, but you'll spend something with cash. You'll go to a store, or you'll go to a restaurant, and you'll use cash, and you'll get some change. They'll be in your pockets. They'll be in your sock drawer. They'll be everywhere. If you look around and you find all of your change and you throw that in a jar and you just do that every time, that in itself will be its own other stream of income that you didn't realize you had before.
Absolutely. All right, so why do budgets commonly fail? So the first thing is negative attitudes. We touched before, budgeting all comes down to you. A lot of people starting out, they think they're hearing all this information that we're giving you today, or information from their teachers, their friends, their parents, other sources, and they're thinking, this is so much, I don't want to do this, I can just do it by myself. When really, once you start to get into it, it's not too hard. It's a pretty simple, easy thing to keep track of, and it takes way more stress off than you think to start to realize where your money's going. Because otherwise, you might spend too much and you'll be like, well, I'm kind of screwed. But if you know where it's going, you'll never run into that issue. Another thing is lack of motivation. You might just be feeling lazy and just don't want to start your budgets, or maybe lack of motivation, like you're in the store, you see something you don't need and you're like, well, maybe I should cheat on this, but I mean, do you really need it? Do you really need it that time? Can you motivate yourself enough in order to save that purchase? And then unrealistic expectations. As we touched on throughout this whole presentation, budgeting can save you a lot more money than you might think. Those things really start to add up and you really start to get control of your life. But sometimes people will start their budget and think that right off the bat, they're going to be saving like $1,000, $2,000 a month or something unrealistic like that. Really, budgeting takes time, but even off the bat, you'll start to notice those small little differences in your lifestyle. There's small little differences in your mental health regarding your money. You'll feel a lot better once you know where it's going. And if you temper your expectations a little bit and you know that, okay, off the bat, I'm not going to be saving a ton of money, but over time, that's going to start to build up. I'm going to really appreciate having budgeted early or later on.
And to add on to that a little bit, the lack of motivation and the unrealistic expectations actually go hand in hand. You're probably lacking motivation because you don't really understand budgeting, or you've never done it before, so it's not something that you have ever acquired an interest for. And your unrealistic expectations is when you initially start and you expect something out of it, but you've never put anything into it, any skills, concepts, any kind of experience into it to have those expectations made real. One of the things that I'll have to say about budgeting for you is that once you start and you're consistent with it and you see those small little changes that Dylan was talking about earlier, you're going to build so much confidence because you know exactly where your money's going. You're going to feel like you're in control. And with that, your motivation is going to go up hand in hand. And throughout time, when you get success in budgeting, you're also going to have success in your expectations for it.
Going off that too, financial goals. It's important to know what you want as you're going into it. Maybe sit down after you've gathered all your information and stuff and say, okay, I want to have $1,000 saved by the end of this year, or $1,200 saved by the end of this year, to make it simple. So how are you going to achieve that? You're going to have to set aside $100 a month so you can reach that goal by the end of the year. So writing out your goals like that gives you a clear and obtainable idea, and you'll start to see progress faster because you'll be putting away that money as you go, and you'll think, okay, wow, I'm getting closer and closer to the goal I had from the beginning. This is really great feeling.
and it goes hand in hand with the last slide. I mean, we're talking about unrealistic expectations. To be able to achieve the expectations that you want to have, you have to think about budgeting not in a week-to-week basis only, but you have to think of it in a year basis. I mean, you've got to have to understand where your money is going to go, how much you want to have at this point, this point, and this point, all the way throughout a year, so that you can create those large goals and accomplish them. Maybe that's paying for tuition. Maybe that's being able to get a better apartment. Whatever it looks like for you, thinking long term is how you achieve your higher financial goals in life. And again, those financial goals might be a vacation. It could be college, like tuition. Maybe you want a new car. Anything that you're interested in, something that you feel like you want to have, but it's harder to attain because it's a bigger price tag. Long-term financial goals through long-term budgeting is the answer to it.
So setting some of these financial goals, like short term, less than 1 year, kind of what I was saying before, like you want to save up to like $1,200 by the end of the year, set aside $100 a month. So then you get into the midterm goals, which is like 1 to 3 years. These are probably bigger purchases, like how it said on the last slide, maybe paying off your credit card debt, saving up for vacation. And the longer you stretch it out, you might not have to put away as much each month, but granted, it will take you longer to get that goal. So planning ahead is important for these kind of things, especially when you get to long term, 3 years or more, like something like a new car down the road. You know, you might be only able to put aside a small amount of money a month, and that's okay. But if you plan ahead, you're going to be able to hit that goal before you know it, and you're going to feel a lot better knowing you're not putting like $1,000 a month towards it and taking that money away from other things you might need.
Absolutely. What should goals be? They should be specific. That is the first thing that we need to talk about. Your goal has to know how much I should save to accomplish that goal. It should know how long it will take me. Unrealistic goals don't have any kind of specifics to them. They say, yeah, I'll just get this job, or yeah, I'll just buy that house, but they don't say how or when they're going to get it. And that's how your dreams, your goals, your concepts for a better life in the future, they just fall apart. You don't have any specifics to them.
Another example here, just getting into some smaller, minute details, like another example of short-term goal, pay off $1,500 credit card debt within 12 months. So how much? $134 per month. It's not a huge amount per month. It doesn't cripple your like bank account. It doesn't take away from the things you need to buy. But if you get it within that time, it's not a bad amount. So I would say that is a realistic short-term goal. So moving on from short-term goals, so an example of a midterm goal, something like a $3,000 vacation in 18 months. $167 per month is a pretty realistic goal. You're putting aside a little bit of money for something you want in the long term. And since you're planning ahead and giving yourself that much time to plan, you're not hurting your bank account month to month.
Absolutely. And then we have our long-term goals. Let's say you have to get $15,000 for a down payment on a home. So you have to do it in 5 years. You have 60 months to get that $15,000 down payment. You have to get $250 a month to do that. Is that a realistic goal? I would say so. You gave yourself 60 months at $250 a month to be able to get that $15,000 down payment. It's realistic, it's thought out, and it's long-term.
Exactly. All right, so moving into one more topic before we wrap this up. So every dollar. This is an example of an app. I wanted to give you guys a personal example of something that I use to easily track my budgeting. So every dollar, we're not sponsored by the way, but every dollar is the app I downloaded when I wanted to start budgeting and wasn't sure how. It's super simple to use. You can put all your categories in, track how much income you make, how much money you make, and you can manually input every time you spend money. So if you do decide to utilize this tool or one of the many other tools out there on the internet, I would say just make sure you're using it, you're keeping yourself honest. Like, for example, every time you go to a restaurant or you drive through the fast food line, while you're waiting for your food to come out, whip out this app real quick and just type in how much you spent. Make sure you have those transactions so you're staying consistent with yourself. But having an app like this, or even a lot of people use written sheets, that might work for you. But having something like this to keep track of your expenses and your income, having it all right there instead of trying to calculate all that mentally, will work absolute wonders on saving you money and for your stress.
Absolutely. Well, we want to go ahead and thank you guys for watching our video. We hope that it was beneficial. We hope you learned something, and I hope that it sparked your interest in budgeting so that you can create a better tomorrow for yourself today.